I thought I knew my family. I thought 15 years of Fourth of July barbecues at my parents' house meant something sacred, unbreakable. I was wrong. 3 days before our annual celebration, my sister Sarah called me sobbing, explaining how our parents were financially devastated and couldn't afford this year's barbecue. My heart shattered for them. I offered to help, but Sarah insisted they were too proud. So I stayed home grilling sad leftover hot dogs alone on my apartment balcony while scrolling through old family photos. Then I opened Instagram and saw Sarah's live stream, professional lighting, catered food, fireworks, everyone laughing, celebrating having the time of their lives. Everyone except me. My name is Henrietta, and for 28 years I believed my family was built on love and honesty. Growing up in suburban Dallas, our house on Maple Street was the heartbeat of our extended family. Dad David worked as a regional manager for a logistics company, while Mom Margaret taught third grade at the local elementary school. My younger sister Sarah and I were inseparable as children, sharing secrets, dreams, and an unshakable bond that I thought would last forever. The annual 4th of July barbecue wasn't just a party for us. It was a sacred tradition that brought together 40 to 50 family members and close friends from across Texas and beyond. Aunts and uncles would drive in from Houston and Austin. Cousins would fly in from Colorado and Arizona. Family friends who'd become honorary relatives over the decades would clear their schedules months in advance. For 15 consecutive years, our backyard transformed into a wonderland of red, white, and blue decorations, the smoky aroma of Dad's famous brisket, and the joyful chaos of children playing while adults caught up on a year's worth of stories. I'd always been the responsible one, the daughter who called twice a week, helped with holiday planning, and stepped up whenever the family needed financial or emotional support. After graduating from University of Texas with a marketing degree, I landed a fantastic position at a growing tech company in Dallas. My promotion to senior marketing coordinator last spring came with a significant salary increase, and I was finally in a position to give back to the parents who'd sacrificed so much for Sarah and me. This year felt extra special because I was planning to introduce my boyfriend Jake to the extended family. We'd been dating for 8 months, and he was everything I'd hoped to find in a partner. Kind, funny, supportive, and genuinely excited about meeting the people who meant the world to me. Jake had already bonded with my parents during smaller gatherings, but the 4th of July barbecue would be his official introduction to the wider family circle. For months, I'd been coordinating with relatives, helping Mom plan the menu, and organizing travel arrangements for out-of-town guests. Cousin Brett and his wife Amanda were driving down from Oklahoma City with their twin toddlers. Aunt Linda was flying in from Phoenix with her teenage daughter Chloe. Uncle Tom and Aunt Patricia were making their traditional road trip from Austin with their famous potato salad and homemade ice cream. Family friends like the Johnsons, who'd been attending for over a decade, had already confirmed their attendance and offered to bring their signature grilled corn. The planning process filled me with pure joy. I spent evenings creating a shared Google Doc for food assignments, coordinating sleeping arrangements for overnight guests, and researching new games and activities for the kids. Sarah seemed equally excited, frequently texting me ideas for decorations and entertainment. She suggested hiring a DJ for the first time, adding professional lighting to create the perfect ambiance for photos, and even incorporating a small fireworks display if the budget allowed. 3 days before the celebration, everything changed with a single phone call. Sarah's voice was barely recognizable through her tears. She'd always been the more emotional of the two of us, but this was different. Raw, devastating, heartbroken. She could barely speak between sobs, and my heart immediately went into protective mode. Sarah explained that she'd just left an emergency family meeting at our parents' house, and the news was worse than anything we could have imagined. According to Sarah, Dad had made a catastrophic investment decision 6 months earlier. He'd been approached by a colleague about an opportunity to invest in what seemed like a surefire real estate venture. The promise of quick returns and financial security for retirement had been too tempting to ignore. Dad had invested their entire savings, plus money borrowed against the house, convinced that this was their path to financial freedom. The investment had collapsed completely. Not only was the money gone, but Dad now owed additional funds to cover the borrowed amount. Our family was facing potential foreclosure, massive debt, and the humiliation of financial ruin. Mom had been so devastated by the news that she could barely function. The stress was affecting her health, and she'd taken a leave of absence from teaching. The 4th of July BBQ, our beloved family tradition, was an impossible expense. The food decorations, travel expenses for family members who needed assistance, and basic party supplies would cost several $1,000s that our parents simply didn't have. More than the financial burden, Mom and Dad were too ashamed to face the extended family. They couldn't bear the thought of everyone discovering their financial crisis, and they were terrified that relatives would feel obligated to offer help that they were too proud to accept. My immediate instinct was to solve the problem. I had money saved, a stable income, and no hesitation about supporting the people who'd given me everything. I offered to cover all the expenses for the barbecue, to help with their mortgage payments, to do whatever was necessary to protect my family from this devastating situation. But Sarah begged me to reconsider. She explained that our parents' pride was already shattered, and accepting financial help from their daughter would destroy the last remnants of their dignity. Dad had specifically made Sarah promise not to tell anyone, especially me, because he couldn't face the shame of his successful daughter discovering what a failure he'd become. Mom had been crying for days, convinced that everyone would judge them for their poor financial decisions. The family had decided together that canceling the barbecue entirely was the only option that allowed them to maintain some dignity. They would tell extended family that there was a scheduling conflict or that someone was ill. The truth would remain a private family matter until they could figure out how to recover financially and emotionally. As Sarah shared these devastating details, I felt my heart breaking for the parents who'd always been my foundation of strength and stability. The image of Dad, who'd always been so confident and capable, crying over his financial mistakes, was almost unbearable. The thought of Mom, who brought joy to everyone around her, being too ashamed to face her own family was crushing. But the real twist that shattered my understanding of everything came when Sarah revealed what she'd discovered while trying to comfort our parents. Going through Mom's purse to find tissues, Sarah had accidentally seen several text messages on Mom's phone that revealed I'd been acting differently toward the family recently. According to Sarah, family members had been reaching out to Mom with concerns about my attitude since my job promotion. Cousin Brett had apparently told Mom that I'd seemed dismissive and cold during our last phone conversation. Aunt Linda had mentioned that I'd been short with her when she asked about bringing extra guests to the barbecue. Several family members had independently expressed worry that success was changing me, making me think I was better than the rest of the family. Sarah showed me screenshots of messages that left me reeling with shock and confusion. These were conversations I didn't remember having, attitudes I'd never expressed, and behavior that was completely foreign to my character. But seeing the evidence in black and white combined with Sarah's tearful explanation of our parents' financial crisis left me questioning everything I thought I knew about myself and my relationships with the people I loved most. The screenshots Sarah showed me were like daggers to my heart. Text conversations that looked exactly like my writing style, but expressing sentiments I would never ever feel about my family. Messages to Aunt Linda that read cold and dismissive, "I'm really busy with work stuff. Can we keep the guest list manageable this year?" A response to Cousin Brett that seemed uncharacteristically harsh. "Let's just stick to the core family. This time, I think smaller is better." I stared at my phone screen, reading these messages that bore my name, but felt like they'd been written by a stranger. The timestamp showed these conversations had happened over the past 3 weeks, during a period when I'd been swamped with a major product launch at work. I remembered being distracted and stressed, but I couldn't recall having these specific conversations or sending these particular messages. Sarah sat beside me on my apartment couch, tissues in hand, explaining how she'd been trying to do damage control for weeks without telling me. She'd been fielding calls from confused and hurt family members who were questioning my commitment to the family barbecue tradition. According to Sarah, our cousin Brett had been particularly upset, telling other relatives that I seemed to think I was too good for family gatherings, now that I had a successful career. The story Sarah told was heartbreaking and convincing. She described how Brett had called our parents directly expressing concern that my new job had changed me. He'd mentioned several incidents where I'd seemed distracted or dismissive during family phone calls. Aunt Linda had apparently had a similar conversation with Mom, wondering if my promotion had made me less interested in maintaining close family relationships. Sarah painted herself as a protective sister trying to shield me from family drama while simultaneously defending me to relatives who were starting to question my character. She'd been caught in the middle. She explained trying to convince family members that I was just stressed with work while also trying to figure out how to address the situation with me directly. The guilt I felt was overwhelming. Had success really changed me without my realizing it? Had I become so focused on my career that I'd unconsciously started treating my family differently? The evidence seemed undeniable, especially coming from Sarah, who had never lied to me about anything important in our entire lives. I apologized, profusely promising Sarah that I would reach out to family members to repair any damage I'd unknowingly caused. But Sarah quickly discouraged this approach, explaining that bringing more attention to the situation would only make things worse. She suggested that the best course of action was for me to step back from the barbecue, planning entirely allowing family tensions to cool down naturally over time. This recommendation felt wrong to every instinct I had, but Sarah's reasoning seemed sound. If family members were already questioning my attitude, inserting myself more aggressively into barbecue planning could be interpreted as controlling or dismissive of their concerns. Sarah offered to handle all communication with relatives, serving as a buffer that would allow relationships to heal without further misunderstandings. Reluctantly, I agreed to take a step back, trusting Sarah's judgment about family dynamics and her assessment of the situation. I felt terrible about the apparent damage I'd done to relationships I treasured, but I was grateful to have Sarah advocating for me behind the scenes. 2 days later, I decided to call Brett directly to clear the air and apologize for any misunderstandings. I'd known Brett since childhood, and we'd always had an easy, joking relationship. If anyone would be willing to have an honest conversation about family dynamics, it would be him. But when I tried calling Brett's number, my call went straight to an automated message saying the number was no longer in service. Confused, I tried calling his wife Amanda, but got the same result. I checked social media and found that I could no longer see Brett's Facebook profile or Instagram account, which seemed strange, since we'd been connected on both platforms for years. Feeling increasingly puzzled, I reached out to Amanda through Facebook Messenger, explaining that I was having trouble reaching them by phone and wanted to discuss bringing Jake to meet Brett's family during the barbecue. Amanda's response came quickly and was warm and enthusiastic, expressing excitement about meeting Jake and asking detailed questions about his background and interests. But then Amanda mentioned something that stopped me cold. She said Brett had been trying to reach me for weeks about bringing his new girlfriend Emma to the barbecue since he and his wife had separated 6 months ago. According to Amanda, Brett had left multiple voicemails and sent several text messages asking about adding Emma to the guest list, but had never received any response from me. This information contradicted everything Sarah had told me about Brett being upset with my attitude. It also revealed that my phone communications were somehow not working properly, since I had no record of receiving any messages from Brett about his relationship changes or his girlfriend Emma. I immediately checked my phone settings, call logs, and message history. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Brett's number was listed in my blocked contacts, along with several other family members, including Aunt Linda, Uncle Tom, and family friends I'd known for decades. I had absolutely no memory of blocking these numbers, and I couldn't imagine any reason why I would have done so. Even more disturbing, when I scrolled through my message history with these family members, I found gaps in our conversations that didn't make sense. There would be messages from them asking questions or sharing news, followed immediately by responses from me that seemed cold or dismissive, with no record of any messages in between that would explain the tone shift. The pieces weren't fitting together, and a horrible suspicion was beginning to form in my mind. But I couldn't bring myself to believe that Sarah, my beloved sister who'd never betrayed my trust in any significant way, could be capable of the level of deception that would be required to create this situation. Instead, I convinced myself that there must be a technical explanation. Maybe my phone had been hacked, or there was some kind of software glitch causing messages to be deleted and contacts to be blocked. I made a mental note to take my phone to the service provider to have it checked, but with the barbecue cancellation crisis and my parents' financial problems weighing on my mind, the phone issues seemed like a minor concern that could wait. The next morning, Sarah arrived at my apartment before 8 o'clock, and I could tell immediately that something terrible had happened. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her usually perfect makeup was smeared, and she was clutching a handful of tissues like a lifeline. She could barely speak coherently, stumbling over words as she tried to explain the devastating news she'd been asked to deliver. According to Sarah, our father had called an emergency family meeting the night before, gathering just Sarah, Mom, and himself in the living room, where we'd opened Christmas presents as children and celebrated countless family milestones. The conversation had been the most difficult of Dad's entire life, and Sarah described watching our strong, capable father break down completely as he confessed the truth about their financial situation. The story Sarah told was even worse than what she'd shared initially. Dad hadn't just lost their savings in a bad investment. He'd been secretly gambling online for over a year, convinced that he could win back money he'd initially lost in small amounts. The gambling had escalated gradually with each loss, convincing him that the next bet would be the one to restore everything he'd lost. By the time Dad realized the extent of his problem, he'd lost not only their entire retirement savings, but had also borrowed against the house, maxed out credit cards, and even taken out a personal loan using the family car as collateral. They were facing immediate foreclosure bankruptcy and the complete destruction of the financial security they'd spent 30 years building. Mom had been completely unaware of the gambling addiction until Dad's confession. Sarah described watching our mother's face change from confusion to disbelief to absolute devastation as Dad revealed the full scope of his deception and the desperate situation they now faced. Mom had been so shocked that she couldn't even cry, sitting in stunned silence while Dad sobbed and begged for forgiveness. The 4th of July barbecue, which would typically cost several $1,000s for food decorations, travel assistance for family members, and other expenses, was completely impossible. But beyond the financial constraints, our parents were too ashamed and humiliated to face the extended family. The thought of pretending everything was normal while harboring such a devastating secret felt unbearable to both of them. Dad had specifically asked Sarah to break the news to me because he couldn't face telling his successful daughter what a complete failure he'd become. He was convinced that I would lose all respect for him, and he couldn't bear the thought of seeing disappointment in my eyes. Mom was equally ashamed, worried that I would judge them for not recognizing the signs of Dad's gambling problem. The decision to cancel the barbecue entirely had been unanimous among the three of them. They would tell extended family that there was a last-minute emergency or illness that made hosting impossible. The truth would remain a family secret until they could figure out how to address their financial crisis and Dad could get treatment for his gambling addiction. As Sarah shared these devastating details, I felt like the foundation of my entire world was crumbling. Dad had always been my hero, the man who taught me about integrity, responsibility, and making smart financial decisions. The idea that he'd been secretly destroying our family's future through gambling was almost impossible to process. My immediate reaction was to offer every form of support I could provide. I had substantial savings, excellent credit, and a stable income that could help them navigate this crisis. I offered to pay off their immediate debts, cover the barbecue expenses, and help Dad find professional treatment for gambling addiction. I was prepared to do whatever was necessary to protect the parents who'd given me everything. But Sarah begged me not to offer financial assistance, explaining that Dad's shame and guilt were already consuming him. If his daughter had to rescue him from his own poor decisions, it would destroy the last remnants of his self-respect. Mom was equally concerned about accepting help from me, worried that it would fundamentally change our parent-child relationship in ways that might never be repaired. Sarah painted a picture of parents who needed time and space to address their problems privately before involving their daughters in the solution. She suggested that the most loving thing I could do was respect their need for dignity and privacy while they figured out how to recover from this situation. The conversation left me feeling helpless and heartbroken. Everything in my nature wanted to immediately solve the problem and protect my family, but Sarah's arguments about preserving our parents' dignity seemed valid and important. I agreed to respect their wishes about not offering direct financial assistance, though every fiber of my being rebelled against standing by while they suffered. The following afternoon, I decided to stop by my parents' house with groceries and some of Mom's favorite flowers, hoping to offer emotional support even if I couldn't provide financial help. I planned to be subtle about it, maybe cooking dinner for them and spending time together without directly addressing the financial crisis. When I knocked on the front door, Dad answered with his usual warm smile and enthusiastic hug. He looked tired but not devastated, which I attributed to him putting on a brave face for my benefit. He invited me in for coffee and seemed genuinely happy to see me asking about work and my plans with Jake for the weekend. As we sat in the kitchen where I'd eaten countless meals as a child, I gently broached the subject of the canceled barbecue, expressing my understanding and support for their decision. I was prepared to offer emotional comfort without mentioning the financial aspects that Sarah had warned me to avoid. But Dad's response confused me completely. He looked genuinely puzzled, asking what I meant about canceling the barbecue. When I mentioned the emergency family meeting and the decision to cancel due to financial difficulties, Dad's confusion deepened. He assured me that the barbecue was definitely still happening and that he was excited about it, especially since it would be Jake's first time meeting the extended family. Thinking that Dad was trying to protect me from the truth about their financial problems, I gently pressed the issue, mentioning that I understood about the investment losses and that I supported whatever decisions they needed to make. But Dad's reaction was not what I expected at all. Instead of the shame or sadness that Sarah had described, Dad seemed genuinely bewildered by my comments. He pulled out his laptop and showed me their bank statements, proving that their finances were not only stable but actually better than they'd been in years, thanks to his recent promotion and Mom's summer tutoring income. He walked me through their investment portfolio, showing conservative, steady growth over the past year, with no major losses or risky decisions. There was no evidence of gambling, no debt beyond their normal mortgage payment, and no financial crisis of any kind. Our parents were actually in the best financial position they'd been in for decades. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. If our parents weren't facing financial difficulties, and if Dad knew nothing about any emergency family meeting, then everything Sarah had told me was a complete lie. But the question that terrified me more than anything was why my own sister would create such an elaborate deception, designed to keep me away from our family's most important annual celebration. The drive back to my apartment from my parents' house felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream where nothing made sense and reality kept shifting beneath my feet. Dad's bank statements were burned into my memory, showing a healthy savings account, steady investment growth, and no sign of the financial catastrophe Sarah had described in such vivid, heartbreaking detail. But I couldn't immediately jump to the conclusion that Sarah had been lying to me. We'd been close our entire lives, sharing secrets, supporting each other through difficult times, and maintaining a level of trust that I'd always considered unshakable. There had to be some explanation that didn't involve my sister deliberately deceiving me about something so serious and hurtful. Maybe Dad was hiding the financial problems from Mom and showing me false bank statements to avoid dealing with the shame Sarah had described. Maybe there were gambling debts that weren't reflected in the accounts he'd shown me. Maybe Sarah had been protecting me from a truth that was even worse than what she'd initially revealed. When I got home, I called Sarah immediately, my mind racing with questions and my heart pounding with anxiety. I explained that I'd stopped by to see Dad and that he'd seemed confused about the barbecue cancellation and the financial crisis. I suggested that maybe Dad was in denial or trying to hide the extent of their problems. Sarah's reaction was immediate and intense. She became hysterical, accusing me of calling her a liar and threatening to destroy our family by spreading accusations and mistrust. Through her tears, she explained that Dad had begged her to keep his gambling problems secret from Mom and that he was probably showing me outdated or fake bank statements to cover up the truth. The story Sarah told now was even more complex and heartbreaking than before. According to her, Dad had confessed that he'd been manipulating their financial records for months to hide his gambling losses from Mom. The bank statements he'd shown me were fabricated, using online tools designed to maintain the illusion that their finances were stable. Dad was so desperate to avoid facing the consequences of his addiction that he was willing to lie directly to his daughters rather than admit the truth. Sarah produced additional evidence to support this new version of events. She showed me what appeared to be legitimate bank statements revealing the gambling losses, along with emails from creditors demanding payment on debts I hadn't seen in Dad's records. She had screenshots of Dad's online gambling accounts showing thousands of dollars in losses over the past year. Everything Sarah showed me looked authentic and professional. The bank statements had proper formatting and logos. The creditor emails came from legitimate-looking addresses with official letterheads. The gambling account screenshots showed activity that aligned with Sarah's timeline of Dad's addiction. But even with this evidence, something felt wrong about the entire situation. Sarah's emotional reactions seemed almost performative, shifting rapidly between different types of distress, depending on which aspect of the story she was emphasizing. Her explanations for Dad's behavior were becoming increasingly complex, requiring multiple layers of deception and manipulation that didn't align with the father I'd known for 28 years. I started paying closer attention to details that had previously seemed insignificant. Sarah's expensive new purse, which I'd noticed during our first conversation about the family crisis, her designer sunglasses, professional manicure, and the subtle highlights in her hair that suggested recent salon visits. For someone who was supposedly dealing with a family financial emergency, Sarah seemed to be spending money freely on personal luxuries. When I asked about these observations, Sarah had ready explanations. The purse was a gift from her boyfriend Marcus, who she'd been dating for several months. The salon treatments were part of a package she'd paid for in advance before learning about Dad's gambling problem. The sunglasses were borrowed from a friend. Everything had innocent explanations, but the pattern felt suspicious. I also started questioning the timeline of events Sarah had described. The emergency family meeting had supposedly happened the night before Sarah came to my apartment with the devastating news. But when I thought back to my conversation with Dad, he'd mentioned specific plans for the barbecue that suggested active recent planning. He'd talked about picking up the brisket from their favorite butcher, confirming the rental of additional tables and chairs, and coordinating with neighbors about parking for out-of-town guests. These weren't the comments of a man who decided to cancel the event due to financial crisis and personal shame. They were the words of someone actively excited about hosting the family gathering and looking forward to the celebration. The next day, I offered to help Mom with some paperwork organization, hoping to get a better sense of their actual financial situation without directly accusing Sarah of deception. Mom was grateful for the assistance and pulled out boxes of documents that needed sorting and filing. As we worked together, I carefully observed her demeanor and comments. Mom seemed relaxed and happy, occasionally mentioning barbecue preparations and asking my opinion about decorations and menu planning. She showed no signs of the devastating emotional trauma that Sarah had described following Dad's confession about gambling addiction. But then I found something that made my blood run cold. Mixed in with utility bills and insurance documents were several bank withdrawal slips, all recent, all for substantial amounts of cash. The handwriting on the withdrawal slips was clearly Sarah's, distinctive in its rounded letters and specific way of forming numbers. More disturbing were several checks made out to cash ranging from $300 to $800 each, all signed with Dad's name, but in handwriting that looked nothing like his usual signature. I'd seen Dad's handwriting thousands of times throughout my life, and these signatures were clearly forged, though skillfully done by someone who'd had practice. The dates on the forged checks and suspicious withdrawals spanned the past 6 months, representing thousands of dollars that had been systematically stolen from my parents' accounts. The evidence was undeniable. Sarah had been stealing money from our parents for months, using Mom's checkbook and forging Dad's signature to cover her tracks. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Sarah hadn't been trying to protect me from Dad's gambling problem. She'd been creating an elaborate lie to explain financial discrepancies that she herself had caused through theft. The canceled barbecue, the family financial crisis, and even the stories about my attitude, problems with extended family were all part of a complex deception designed to cover up Sarah's systematic theft from our parents. But even with this evidence, I struggled to understand the motivation behind such betrayal. Sarah had a good job, no major expenses that I knew about, and had never shown signs of financial desperation. Why would she risk destroying our family relationships and her own integrity for money she didn't seem to desperately need? The answer to that question would prove to be even more shocking than the theft itself. Armed with concrete evidence of Sarah's theft, but still struggling to understand her motivations, I knew I had to confront her directly. But I also knew that Sarah was skilled at manipulation and emotional deflection, so I needed to be strategic about how I approached the conversation. I decided to give Sarah one more opportunity to tell me the truth voluntarily. I called her and explained that I'd been helping Mom organize paperwork and had some questions about the family's financial records. I mentioned finding withdrawal slips and checks that didn't seem to match what Dad had shown me about their stable financial situation. Sarah's immediate response was panic, though she tried to disguise it as concern for our parents' privacy. She quickly explained that she'd been helping Dad manage some of the financial cleanup from his gambling problem, making withdrawals and handling payments that he was too ashamed to deal with directly. The checks made out to cash were for paying off gambling debts to private individuals who demanded cash payments to avoid official records. This explanation might have been believable if not for the dates on the documents. The withdrawals and forged checks dated back months before Sarah had claimed Dad's gambling problem began. When I pointed out this discrepancy, Sarah became flustered and started crying again, claiming that Dad had been lying to her about the timeline and that his gambling addiction was actually much older and more severe than she'd initially understood. Sarah begged me not to confront our parents with these financial records, explaining that she was working secretly with Dad to resolve the situation without involving Mom. According to Sarah, Dad had confessed everything to her weeks ago and asked for her help in covering up the extent of his losses until he could find a way to replace the stolen money. The barbecue cancellation was part of a broader plan to reduce expenses while Dad worked overtime and took on additional projects to rebuild their savings. But then Sarah made a critical mistake. She mentioned that the barbecue cancellation was also necessary because Dad needed to attend gambling addiction counseling sessions during the 4th of July weekend. This detail contradicted her earlier claim that the cancellation was purely financial, and it also didn't align with Dad's obvious excitement about hosting the barbecue when I'd spoken with him. I pressed Sarah for more details about Dad's treatment plan, and she produced what appeared to be official documentation from a gambling addiction counseling center. The paperwork looked professional, with proper logos and formatting showing a series of intensive therapy sessions scheduled for the holiday weekend. Sarah explained that Dad had specifically chosen this weekend for intensive treatment because missing the barbecue would help him avoid the stress and temptation of normal social situations. For a moment, I wanted to believe this explanation. It would mean that Dad was actively addressing his problem and that Sarah was supporting his recovery rather than enabling destructive behavior. But something about the counseling center documentation felt wrong, and I decided to verify the information independently. I called the phone number listed on the treatment center paperwork, expecting to speak with a receptionist or scheduling coordinator. Instead, the number was disconnected with an automated message stating that it was no longer in service. I searched online for the treatment center's name and address, but found no websites, reviews, or official listings for any such facility. When I searched the address provided on the paperwork, I discovered it was a vacant office building that had been empty for over 2 years. The counseling center that was supposedly treating Dad's gambling addiction didn't exist at all. Sarah had created fake documentation to support her latest version of events. This discovery forced me to confront the truth I'd been avoiding. Sarah was not trying to protect our family from Dad's gambling problem. She was systematically lying, stealing, and manipulating everyone around her for reasons I still didn't understand. I spent the rest of that day conducting my own investigation into Sarah's recent activities and financial situation. I checked her social media accounts more carefully, looking for clues about her spending habits and lifestyle choices. What I found painted a disturbing picture of someone living far beyond her apparent means. Sarah's Instagram showed expensive dinners at upscale restaurants, weekend trips to luxury resorts, designer clothing and accessories, and professional spa treatments that would cost thousands of dollars per month. She'd been posting about these activities regularly for the past 6 months, always tagging them as gifts from her boyfriend Marcus or special treats she'd earned through work bonuses. But when I looked more closely at Marcus, something didn't add up. His social media presence was minimal, with very few photos and almost no personal information. The photos that did exist looked generic and impersonal, more like stock photos than genuine personal pictures. His listed employer was a company that didn't seem to exist when I searched for it online. I began to suspect that Marcus might not be real at all, but rather a fictional boyfriend that Sarah had created to explain her sudden wealth and expensive lifestyle. If Marcus didn't exist, then Sarah's explanations for her luxury purchases were lies, and the money was coming from some other source. The most likely source was the money she'd been stealing from our parents, but the amounts I'd seen in the bank records didn't seem sufficient to support the level of spending Sarah was displaying. This suggested that her theft might be more extensive than what I'd discovered, or that she was stealing money from additional sources beyond our family. I decided to drive by Sarah's apartment complex to get a better sense of her living situation. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. Sarah was living in a luxury apartment complex with amenities like valet parking, concierge service, and rooftop pools. The rent for apartments in her building started at over $3,000 per month, far more than someone with her job could afford on a legitimate salary. But the most shocking discovery came when I found the planning documents hidden in Sarah's car while she was visiting our parents. I'd gone to their house hoping to speak with Dad privately about the financial irregularities, and I noticed Sarah's car parked in the driveway. The doors were unlocked, and I could see papers scattered across the passenger seat. The documents revealed the truth that explained everything Sarah had been planning, the original barbecue all along, using our parents' stolen money to pay for elaborate catering, professional entertainment, and expensive decorations. There was no cancellation, no financial crisis, and no gambling addiction. Sarah had created the entire deception to exclude me from the family gathering while using our parents' money to host an impressive celebration that would make her look generous and successful. The catering orders showed plans for professional barbecue service, gourmet side dishes, premium alcoholic beverages, and an elaborate dessert spread. The entertainment bookings included a DJ, professional lighting equipment, and a fireworks display that would cost several $1,000s. All of these expenses were being charged to credit cards that were linked to our parents' bank accounts. Sarah had been systematically stealing money from our parents for months, not because of any family financial crisis, but to fund a lavish lifestyle and an expensive party that would elevate her social status within our extended family. The lies about Dad's gambling addiction, the fake counseling center documentation, and the elaborate stories about family financial problems were all designed to keep me away from the barbecue so I wouldn't discover her theft or question the source of funding for such an expensive celebration. But I still didn't understand why Sarah specifically wanted to exclude me from the barbecue. We'd always been close, and I'd never done anything to threaten her relationships with other family members. The answer to that question would prove to be even more devastating than the financial theft. July 4th arrived with the kind of perfect Texas weather that made outdoor celebrations magical. Clear skies, gentle breeze temperature in the mid-80s, and not a cloud in sight. It should have been the ideal day for our traditional family barbecue, the kind of day that creates memories that last for decades. Instead, I woke up alone in my apartment, feeling more isolated and confused than I'd ever experienced in my adult life. Jake had offered to spend the day with me, but I'd encouraged him to visit his own family in Fort Worth, not wanting to burden him with the complicated emotional mess my family situation had become. I'd spent the previous evening wrestling with what to do about the evidence I'd discovered regarding Sarah's theft and deception. Part of me wanted to immediately confront my parents with the forged checks and withdrawal slips exposing Sarah's betrayal and protecting them from further financial damage. But another part of me hoped that there was still some explanation I hadn't considered, some way that Sarah's actions could be interpreted as misguided help rather than deliberate theft. The morning felt surreal as I went through normal routines while knowing that somewhere across town my entire extended family was preparing for a celebration I'd been systematically excluded from through lies and manipulation. I found myself checking my phone constantly, hoping for a message from someone in the family acknowledging the confusion and inviting me to join them after all. Around 10 in the morning, I started receiving text messages from family members, but they weren't the invitations I'd been hoping for. Instead, they were cold, brief responses to my earlier messages expressing sadness about the barbecue cancellation. Cousin Brett's wife, Amanda, sent a message that stung. Maybe next year you'll actually want to spend time with family instead of making excuses. Aunt Linda's response was even more hurtful. Sarah explained your situation to everyone. We understand you have other priorities now. Uncle Tom, who'd always been like a second father to me, sent the most devastating message of all. Disappointed, but not surprised. Success changes people, and apparently it changed you. Hope your new life is worth losing your family. These messages made no sense in the context of what I knew to be true. I'd never made excuses about spending time with family, never expressed anything but enthusiasm about our barbecue tradition, and never given anyone reason to think that professional success had changed my values or priorities. But clearly, someone had been telling my family members a very different story about my attitude and behavior. I tried calling several family members to clarify the confusion, but my calls went straight to voicemail or were answered with brief, dismissive conversations. Everyone seemed to already have their minds made up about my character and motivations based on information that had apparently come from Sarah. By noon, I felt completely defeated. I sat on my apartment balcony with a package of hot dogs I'd bought weeks earlier for a barbecue that was never going to happen. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was grilling sad leftover meat alone while somewhere across Dallas, my family was enjoying what should have been our shared celebration. The hot dogs tasted like cardboard, and I couldn't stop thinking about previous Fourth of July barbecues when this same balcony had been filled with laughter, conversation, and the warmth of family connection. I looked through old photos on my phone, remembering happier times when our family felt unbreakable and our traditions felt sacred. Around 6 in the evening, my phone buzzed with a notification that Sarah was going live on Instagram. My heart stopped for a moment, wondering if she was going to address the barbecue cancellation or share some update about Dad's supposed treatment program. I opened the app with trembling fingers, not prepared for what I was about to see. The live stream showed our parents' backyard transformed into something that looked like a professional event space. String lights were draped between trees, creating a warm, magical ambiance. Tables covered with elegant linens were arranged perfectly around the yard. A professional DJ booth was set up near the pool, and I could see catering stations with elaborate food displays. But it wasn't just the expensive decorations and professional catering that took my breath away. It was seeing every single person I'd expected to spend the holiday with, all gathered together, laughing, celebrating, and having the time of their lives. Cousin Brett was there with a woman I didn't recognize who must have been the girlfriend Emma he'd been trying to tell me about. Aunt Linda was chatting with family friends while her teenage daughter Chloe played in the pool with other kids. Uncle Tom and Aunt Patricia were manning one of the grilling stations, clearly enjoying themselves as they cooked their famous specialties. Family friends like the Johnsons were there with their children who'd grown so much since I'd last seen them. Even neighbors and acquaintances I'd known for years were mingling throughout the party, making it clear that this wasn't a small, informal gathering, but a major celebration that had been planned for months. The production value of everything I was seeing proved that this barbecue had cost thousands of dollars and required extensive planning and coordination. The professional lighting, catered food, live music, and elaborate decorations were not things that could be thrown together at the last minute or funded by people facing financial crisis. As I watched the live stream in complete shock and devastation, I started taking screenshots of everything I was seeing. The timestamp proved that this celebration was happening in real time, on the day our family barbecue was supposed to be canceled due to financial hardship. The evidence was undeniable. Everything Sarah had told me was a complete lie designed to exclude me from our most important family tradition. But the most heartbreaking part was watching my parents in the background of Sarah's live stream. Dad was laughing with relatives, clearly enjoying himself, showing no signs of the gambling addiction shame that Sarah had described. Mom was chatting with Aunt Linda, looking relaxed and happy, not devastated by financial crisis or family secrets. My parents looked exactly like themselves, loving, generous people who enjoyed bringing family together for celebrations. They looked like people who had no idea that one of their daughters had been systematically excluded from this gathering through lies and manipulation. The realization that my entire family was celebrating without me while believing that I had chosen not to participate was more painful than any betrayal I'd ever experienced. But the worst part was still to come when Sarah addressed her live stream audience directly and revealed the true depth of her deception. As I continued watching Sarah's live stream, fighting back tears and trying to process the magnitude of her betrayal, the camera work became more professional and intentional. Sarah wasn't just casually broadcasting a family gathering. She was producing content, narrating the celebration like a lifestyle blogger, showcasing a perfect event. Happy 4th of July, everyone! Sarah's voice was bright and enthusiastic as she panned the camera across the beautifully decorated backyard. I'm so excited to share our amazing family barbecue with you all. As you can see, we really went all out this year with professional catering, live music, and even fireworks planned for later tonight. The camera lingered on expensive details that proved the substantial cost of the celebration. Gourmet appetizer stations with foods I recognized from upscale catering menus. Premium alcoholic beverages arranged in elegant displays. Fresh flower centerpieces that would have cost hundreds of dollars from a professional florist. Rented furniture and professional lighting equipment that transformed the backyard into something resembling a wedding reception. Sarah moved through the party like a gracious hostess, introducing her social media followers to various family members and highlighting special touches she'd added to make the celebration memorable. She showed off a custom dessert station with professionally decorated cupcakes featuring 4th of July themes. She demonstrated the high-end audio system, pumping out perfectly curated patriotic music. She even gave viewers a tour of the elaborate fireworks setup that was waiting for darkness. Every detail Sarah showcased represented significant expense and months of advanced planning. This wasn't a last-minute gathering thrown together to help family members deal with financial crisis. This was a meticulously planned, professionally executed celebration that had cost more money than our family had ever spent on previous barbecues. But what made the live stream truly horrifying wasn't just the evidence of Sarah's lies about financial hardship. It was watching family members I'd known and loved my entire life, all clearly having an amazing time, while completely unaware that I'd been deliberately excluded through systematic deception. I watched Cousin Brett playing cornhole with Uncle Tom, both of them laughing like they hadn't a care in the world. I saw Aunt Linda helping Mom arrange food on the catering tables, both women looking relaxed and happy. I observed family friends chatting comfortably with relatives, creating the warm, inclusive atmosphere that had always made our barbecues special. None of these people looked like they were dealing with family drama, financial crisis, or concerns about anyone's attitude or behavior. They all looked like themselves, loving, fun, generous people who enjoyed spending time together and celebrating important traditions. Around the 30-minute mark of the live stream, Sarah began addressing her audience more directly, and what she said made my blood run cold. She started talking about family dynamics and the importance of surrounding yourself with positive, supportive people who truly care about your happiness and success. You know, sometimes in families, you have to make difficult decisions about boundaries. Sarah said, her voice taking on a more serious, reflective tone. Not everyone who shares your DNA actually shares your values or wants the best for you. Sometimes, the healthiest thing you can do is create space between yourself and family members who bring negative energy into your life. The camera was focused on Sarah's face as she delivered this commentary, but I could hear the party continuing in the background, music playing, conversations, flowing, children laughing in the pool. The celebration was clearly in full swing, with everyone enjoying themselves completely. This year, we made some tough choices about our guest list. Sarah continued, her voice gaining confidence as she warmed to her theme. We decided that our family gathering should be a place of joy, gratitude, and genuine connection. We didn't want anyone here who would rather be somewhere else or who thinks they're too good for simple family traditions. Several family members who were visible in the background of the camera shot were nodding along, with Sarah's words clearly understanding that she was referring to someone specific without naming them directly. The realization that my family members were agreeing with Sarah's characterization of me based on lies and manipulated information was devastating beyond anything I'd ever experienced. Sometimes people get successful and forget where they came from. Sarah continued her voice, taking on a tone of gentle sadness. They start looking down on the people who loved them before they had money or status. It's sad, but it's also liberating to recognize when someone has grown beyond wanting to be part of your family. I watched Uncle Tom nodding in agreement, the same uncle who taught me to fish and helped me with algebra homework throughout middle school. I saw Aunt Linda making sympathetic faces, the same aunt who'd driven 3 hours to attend my college graduation and had been like a second mother to me throughout my childhood. These were people who'd known me since birth, who'd watched me grow up, who'd celebrated my achievements and supported me through challenges. But they were all nodding along as Sarah painted me as an arrogant, ungrateful person who'd abandoned my family due to professional success in social climbing. But you know what? Sarah's tone shifted to something brighter and more optimistic. When you remove negative influences from your life, you create space for so much more joy and authenticity. Look around at these amazing people who chose to be here, who prioritize family, who understand what really matters in life. The camera panned across the party again, showing everyone having a fantastic time. Dad was manning one of the grills, looking completely content and relaxed. Mom was arranging flowers, humming along to the music. Cousin Brett was teaching his girlfriend Emma to play horseshoes, both of them laughing at her beginner's attempts. Sarah's live stream had over 200 viewers, with comments flowing continuously from people praising the beautiful celebration and supporting her commentary about family boundaries. Strangers on the internet were agreeing that she'd made wise choices about excluding negative family members, not knowing that the person she was talking about had been systematically lied to and manipulated. Sometimes the best gift you can give your family is protecting them from people who don't want to be there anyway, Sarah concluded before shifting back to showing off party details and interacting with guests. The live stream continued for another 20 minutes, showcasing the elaborate fireworks display that lit up the night sky above our childhood home. Professional-grade fireworks that would have cost thousands of dollars, funded by money stolen from our parents' accounts, celebrating a family tradition that I'd been excluded from through lies, manipulation, and character assassination. As I watched those fireworks exploding in brilliant colors above the backyard where I'd spent countless happy holidays, I realized that Sarah's betrayal wasn't just about excluding me from one event. She'd systematically destroyed my relationships with extended family members, stolen money from our parents, and created a false narrative about my character that might take years to overcome. But I also realized that I now had concrete evidence of everything Sarah had done, and I was finally ready to fight back. I turned off the live stream and sat in stunned silence for several minutes, trying to process the full scope of what I'd just witnessed. My entire family celebrating without me, completely convinced that I'd chosen not to participate because I thought I was too good for family gatherings. Professional catering and entertainment funded by money stolen from my parents. Sarah presenting herself as the loving daughter who'd protected the family from my negative influence. The anger I felt was unlike anything I'd experienced in my adult life, not just anger at Sarah's betrayal, but rage at the systematic way she destroyed my relationships with people I loved while stealing money and manipulating everyone around her. But I knew that acting on that anger immediately would only make the situation worse. I needed to be strategic to gather more evidence and to approach this in a way that would expose the truth rather than create more family drama. I turned off my phone and tried to get some sleep, but my mind kept racing through everything I'd learned over the past week. Sarah's lies about Dad's gambling addiction, the forged checks and stolen money, the blocked phone numbers and intercepted messages, the elaborate barbecue that had cost thousands of dollars while our family believed we couldn't afford a simple celebration. I woke up the next morning to 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages from various family members. My heart started pounding as I scrolled through them, wondering what new crisis or manipulation Sarah had created overnight. But as I read the messages, I realized that something had gone wrong with Sarah's plan, and family members were reaching out with genuine concern rather than continued coldness. Most of the missed calls were from Dad, and his voicemail showed increasing panic and confusion as the night progressed. The first message was casual, asking if I was okay and mentioning that Sarah seemed worried about me. But each subsequent message showed growing alarm as Dad tried to understand what was happening. "Henrietta, sweetheart, please call me back," Dad's voice said in the fourth voicemail. "Sarah is saying you're having some kind of crisis and that you might hurt yourself. I don't understand what's going on, but I need to hear your voice and know you're safe." The later voicemails revealed that Sarah had told Dad I was experiencing a mental health emergency, possibly involving self-harm, which explained why I hadn't attended the barbecue and wasn't responding to calls. According to Sarah, I'd been struggling with depression and anxiety related to work stress and relationship problems, and my absence from family gatherings was a cry for help, rather than arrogance or disinterest. "Your sister is beside herself with worry," Dad said in his most recent voicemail left at 2 in the morning. "She thinks you might need professional help, and she's been trying to figure out how to support you without making things worse. Please just call and let us know you're okay. We love you so much, and we want to help with whatever you're going through." Reading the Dad's text messages revealed even more of Sarah's manipulation. She'd apparently spent the evening after her live stream convincing our parents that my absence from the barbecue was a sign of serious mental health problems that required immediate intervention and financial support. But then I found the text message that revealed Sarah's ultimate goal, and everything clicked into place. Dad had sent me a message at 2:15 in the morning that read, "Sweetheart, I don't understand what's happening, but Sarah said you might need financial help getting back on your feet. Can you send the $2,800 for bills like we discussed? She said you mentioned this amount specifically as what you could contribute to help with your recovery." The number was oddly specific, and I had absolutely no memory of any conversation with Dad about lending money or contributing to bills, but more importantly, the request revealed that Sarah had somehow convinced Dad that I owed them money, or had offered to provide financial assistance that was now urgently needed. I realized that Sarah had been setting up this financial manipulation for weeks, possibly planting seeds about my supposed mental health struggles and my need to contribute money to family expenses as part of my recovery process. The barbecue exclusion hadn't just been about keeping me away from the celebration, it had been the setup for a larger scheme to extract money from me while maintaining her victim narrative. The genius of Sarah's plan was that it turned my exclusion from the family gathering into evidence of my mental health problems, which then justified asking me for money as a way of contributing to my own treatment and recovery. If I sent the money, it would validate Sarah's claims about my psychological issues. If I refused, it would seem like evidence that I was being selfish and uncaring toward my family during a crisis. But Sarah had made a critical error in her manipulation. Dad's text messages revealed that he had no knowledge of the financial problems, gambling addiction, or family crises that Sarah had described to me. His concern was genuine, but based entirely on false information Sarah had provided about my mental state and supposed need for intervention. This meant that Dad was completely unaware of the money that had been stolen from their accounts, the forged checks, or the elaborate lies Sarah had been telling to various family members. He genuinely believed the barbecue had happened as planned, with me choosing not to attend due to personal problems rather than being deliberately excluded. Instead of responding to Dad's text immediately, I decided to conduct my own investigation into what family members actually knew about recent events. I started calling relatives individually, carefully asking questions about their understanding of why I hadn't attended the barbecue and what information they'd received about my situation. The conversation has revealed the full scope of Sarah's character assassination campaign. Each family member had been given a different version of why I was absent, but all the stories painted me as either arrogant and dismissive or struggling with serious personal problems that made me unreliable and difficult to be around. Cousin Brett had been told that I'd said his girlfriend Emma wasn't welcome at family gatherings because I didn't approve of his divorce. Aunt Linda had been told that I'd complained about the cost of traveling to family events and suggested that people should only attend if they could afford to contribute significantly to expenses. Uncle Tom had been told that I'd said the family barbecue was beneath me now that I had a successful career. But most disturbing was learning that Sarah had also been spreading rumors about my mental health, suggesting that work stress had caused me to become paranoid and unstable. Several family members mentioned being warned by Sarah that I might make accusations or create drama if I attended family gatherings, and that excluding me was actually a kindness that protected both me and the rest of the family. The systematic nature of Sarah's lies was breathtaking in its scope and cruelty. She'd spent months poisoning my relationships with extended family while simultaneously stealing money from our parents and planning an elaborate celebration that she'd use to further establish herself as the loving, responsible daughter. But I also realized that Sarah's plan contained the seeds of its own destruction. By involving so many people in different versions of her lies, she'd created a web of contradictions that could be exposed if the right questions were asked. And by leaving such clear evidence of financial theft, she'd provided concrete proof that her claims about family financial crisis were completely fabricated. It was time to stop reacting to Sarah's manipulations and start taking control of the situation. Instead of responding emotionally to Dad's desperate text about the $2,800, I made a decision that would prove to be crucial. I was going to investigate Sarah's claims systematically and gather evidence that would expose the truth to my entire family at once. Running around trying to defend myself against individual lies had played right into Sarah's hands. But conducting a thorough investigation would give me the proof I needed to reveal the full scope of her deception. I started by creating a detailed timeline of everything that had happened over the past month, documenting dates, conversations, and claims that Sarah had made. I wrote down every story she'd told me about Dad's gambling addiction, Mom's emotional breakdown, family financial crisis, and the barbecue cancellation. I noted contradictions between different versions of her stories and inconsistencies in her explanations. Next, I gathered all the physical evidence I'd collected, the forged checks with Dad's fake signature, the withdrawal slips in Sarah's handwriting, the fake counseling center documentation and screenshots from the live stream showing the expensive party that contradicted claims about financial hardship. I organized everything chronologically and created copies of all documents in case Sarah tried to destroy evidence. But I realized that I needed more information about Sarah's actual financial situation and the source of money funding her expensive lifestyle. The amount of money I'd seen stolen from our parents' accounts was significant, but it didn't seem sufficient to cover luxury apartment rent, frequent restaurant meals, spa treatments, designer purchases, and an elaborate party that had cost thousands of dollars. I decided to call Sarah's workplace, pretending to be from their accounting department, conducting a routine audit verification. I explained that I was reviewing employee financial records and needed to confirm some details about Sarah's account access and recent transactions. The receptionist connected me to someone in their finance department who was surprisingly willing to share information. What I learned made my blood run cold. Sarah wasn't just facing internal review for minor discrepancies, she was under active investigation for embezzling money from client accounts, and the company's security department had been building a case against her for weeks. According to the finance representative, Sarah had been systematically stealing from elderly clients' retirement funds, using her access to their accounts to make unauthorized transfers that she'd been covering up through falsified documentation. The amounts involved were staggering: over $50,000 stolen from various clients over the past year. Sarah had been using sophisticated methods to hide the theft, creating fake invoices, manipulating account statements, and forging client signatures on authorization forms. But a recent audit had uncovered discrepancies that couldn't be explained, and the company was preparing to terminate her employment and file criminal charges. The timeline of Sarah's workplace theft aligned perfectly with when she'd started stealing money from our parents and when her expensive lifestyle had begun. She'd been stealing from multiple sources simultaneously, using client funds to pay for her luxury apartment and personal expenses while using our parents' money for the elaborate barbecue and other special events. But even more disturbing was learning that Sarah's employer had already contacted law enforcement about the embezzlement. Criminal charges were going to be filed within the next week, regardless of whether our family pressed charges for the domestic theft. Sarah's attempts to manipulate me into providing money weren't just about greed, they were about desperation to replace stolen funds before an audit could discover the full extent of her crimes. This information completely changed my understanding of Sarah's motivations and timeline. She wasn't just a sister who'd made some poor choices about lying and stealing small amounts of money. She was someone facing serious criminal charges who'd been using increasingly desperate methods to cover up substantial theft from multiple sources. I realized that Sarah's elaborate deception about the barbecue, her character assassination campaign against me, and her manipulation of our parents' emotions were all part of a larger strategy to maintain control over family dynamics while she dealt with her criminal situation. By positioning herself as a caring daughter and painting me as problematic, she'd ensured that family members would support her version of events and provide her with emotional and potentially financial assistance. But Sarah had also made herself vulnerable by creating such an elaborate web of lies. Every story she'd told, every document she'd forged, and every manipulation she'd attempted had left evidence that could be used to expose her deception. I just needed to present that evidence in a way that would convince my family members to listen to the truth rather than continue believing her lies. I spent the rest of that day reaching out to family members who'd attended the barbecue, not to defend myself against Sarah's accusations, but to ask specific questions about what they'd been told and when they'd received that information. I was careful not to make any accusations against Sarah initially, instead focusing on gathering information about the contradictions in her stories. The conversations revealed that Sarah had been conducting her character assassination campaign for months, not just the past few weeks. She'd been gradually planting seeds of doubt about my attitude and behavior, starting with small comments about how work stress was changing me and building up to more serious claims about my supposed arrogance and disinterest in family relationships. But I also discovered that several family members had been confused by some of Sarah's claims, noticing contradictions between what she said about me and their own experiences during direct conversations. Cousin Brett mentioned that Sarah had told him I didn't want his girlfriend at the barbecue, but he'd never actually spoken to me directly about bringing her. Aunt Linda had been told I complained about travel costs, but she couldn't recall me ever mentioning money as an issue during our phone calls. These family members were starting to question Sarah's version of events, especially after my polite, concerned phone calls that were completely inconsistent with the arrogant, dismissive behavior she described. They were beginning to wonder if there had been some kind of miscommunication or misunderstanding that had been blown out of proportion. By the end of the day, I had enough evidence to expose Sarah's deception completely, but I also realized that simply presenting facts wasn't going to be sufficient. Sarah was skilled at emotional manipulation, and she would likely respond to accusations by claiming that I was having a mental breakdown or trying to destroy the family through paranoid delusions. I needed to be strategic about how I revealed the truth, gathering enough support from family members that Sarah wouldn't be able to dismiss my evidence as the ravings of someone experiencing a psychological crisis. I needed to present information in a way that would protect our parents from additional manipulation while ensuring that Sarah faced consequences for her crimes. The next phase of my plan would require careful coordination and perfect timing, but I was finally ready to fight back against Sarah's systematic betrayal and reclaim my place in the family that I'd never actually chosen to leave. With overwhelming evidence of Sarah's systematic deception, theft, and manipulation, I knew that my next steps had to be carefully planned and perfectly executed. Sarah was skilled at emotional manipulation and would likely respond to direct accusations with either aggressive denials or claims that I was experiencing a mental breakdown. I needed to approach the situation in a way that would protect our parents, expose the truth to extended family, and ensure that Sarah faced appropriate consequences for her crimes. My first priority was organizing a family meeting where I could present evidence systematically without giving Sarah advance warning that would allow her to prepare counter-arguments or destroy additional evidence. I reached out to the family members who'd been most confused by Sarah's claims about my behavior: Cousin Brett, Aunt Linda, and Uncle Tom. I explained that I'd discovered some concerning information about recent family dynamics and asked if they would be willing to attend a meeting at our parents' house to discuss everything openly. These family members agreed immediately, expressing relief that we were finally going to address the confusion and miscommunications that had been affecting our relationships. Brett mentioned that he'd been bothered by contradictions between what Sarah had told him about my attitude and his own experiences talking with me. Linda admitted that she'd been questioning some of Sarah's claims because they didn't align with the person she'd known me to be for nearly 3 decades. I spent 2 days preparing a comprehensive presentation of evidence that would tell the story chronologically and make the truth undeniable. I organized bank records showing the forged checks and unauthorized withdrawals, created a timeline of Sarah's conflicting stories about Dad's supposed gambling addiction, and compiled screenshots from her social media showing the expensive lifestyle that contradicted claims about family financial crisis. But the most damaging evidence came from my investigation into Sarah's workplace situation. I'd learned that the company's security department was planning to arrest Sarah within the next week, and I'd obtained documentation showing that her theft from client accounts had been ongoing for over a year. This information proved that Sarah's financial crimes extended far beyond our family and involved elderly victims who trusted her with their retirement savings. I also prepared evidence showing how Sarah had systematically blocked my phone contacts, deleted messages from family members, and responded to communications pretending to be me. I'd recovered some of these deleted messages through phone company records, and they showed a clear pattern of Sarah intercepting family communications and sending cold, dismissive responses that had damaged my relationships with people I loved. The day before the family meeting, I made one final discovery that proved to be the key to understanding Sarah's true motivations. While helping Mom organize some paperwork at their house, I found Sarah's old bedroom and decided to search for additional evidence. What I discovered was shocking even by the standards of everything else I'd uncovered. Hidden in Sarah's closet was a collection of secretly recorded family conversations going back over 2 years. She'd been using a small digital recording device to capture private discussions, arguments, and vulnerable moments, then editing them out of context to support her various manipulations. There were recordings of Dad discussing normal financial concerns from years ago, which Sarah had used to create her fake gambling addiction story. There were recordings of Mom complaining about holiday planning stress, which Sarah had twisted into evidence of family dysfunction. Most disturbing were recordings of me making casual negative comments about work, stress family scheduling challenges, and other normal life frustrations that Sarah had spliced together and taken out of context to create false evidence of arrogance and family disrespect. She'd been secretly recording our private conversations for years, building an archive of material that she could manipulate to support whatever narrative she wanted to create. The recordings also revealed that Sarah had been planning to exclude me from family gatherings for months, not just the recent barbecue. She'd been systematically poisoning relationships with extended family while building a case for why my absence would actually improve family dynamics. The barbecue exclusion hadn't been a spontaneous decision. It had been the culmination of a long-term strategy to establish herself as the favored daughter while destroying my standing within the family. But the recordings also contained evidence that would prove Sarah's undoing conversations where she admitted to stealing money, discussed her workplace embezzlement, and revealed the true scope of her manipulation. She'd apparently been so confident in her ability to control family dynamics that she'd never considered the possibility that her secretly recorded evidence might be turned against her. Armed with this comprehensive evidence, I felt ready to confront Sarah and expose the truth to our family, but I also realized that the meeting needed to be handled carefully to protect our parents, who were going to be devastated to learn about both the theft and the systematic deception that had been happening in their own home. I called Dad and asked if we could have a family meeting the next evening to discuss some important issues that had been affecting our relationships. I explained that several family members had questions about recent miscommunications and that I thought it would be helpful for everyone to sit down together and clear the air. Dad was enthusiastic about the idea, mentioning that he'd been concerned about family tensions and hoping that we could resolve whatever problems had been causing confusion. I specifically asked Dad not to mention the family meeting to Sarah until the day of, explaining that I wanted to coordinate with other family members first to make sure everyone could attend. This would prevent Sarah from having advance warning that might allow her to prepare explanations or excuses for the evidence I was going to present. The night before the confrontation, I barely slept, running through various scenarios of how Sarah might respond and preparing myself for the emotional difficulty of watching our parents learn about her betrayal. But I also felt a sense of relief that the truth was finally going to come out and that I would no longer be defending myself against lies and manipulations. The next evening, family members began arriving at our parents' house around 6 o'clock. Cousin Brett came with his girlfriend Emma, who I was finally going to meet under very different circumstances than anyone had planned. Aunt Linda brought her daughter Chloe, and Uncle Tom came with Aunt Patricia. The atmosphere was somewhat tense, with everyone sensing that this meeting was about more than simple miscommunications. Dad and Mom seemed nervous but hopeful, clearly wanting to resolve whatever family issues had been causing problems. They set up the living room with extra chairs and offered drinks and snacks, treating the gathering like a normal family meeting, rather than the confrontation it was about to become. When Sarah arrived 15 minutes late, she looked surprised to see so many family members gathered together. Her initial reaction was to smile brightly and ask if she'd missed some kind of family celebration or announcement. But I could see wariness in her eyes as she realized that this meeting had been organized without her knowledge or input. I asked everyone to come together because I've discovered some information that I think the family needs to know about. I began, my voice steady despite the anxiety I felt. Over the past few weeks, there have been a lot of misunderstandings and miscommunications that have affected our relationships. I think it's time we all heard the truth about what's been happening. Sarah's face immediately shifted from confusion to defensive alertness. She started to interrupt, but I continued speaking, explaining that I had evidence to share and asking everyone to listen before asking questions or making comments. I began with the financial evidence showing our parents the forged checks and unauthorized withdrawals that had been systematically stealing money from their accounts. Dad's face went white as he recognized the forged signatures, and Mom gasped when she saw the amounts involved. This wasn't a few $100s. This was thousands of dollars that had been stolen over several months. But Sarah was ready with an immediate explanation. She broke down crying, claiming that she'd been trying to help Dad cover up his gambling debts without telling Mom. According to Sarah, Dad had confessed his addiction to her months ago and begged for help in hiding the losses until he could get treatment and replace the missing money. The living room fell into stunned silence as I systematically presented evidence of Sarah's deception and theft. Mom's face had gone completely pale as she processed the bank records showing thousands of dollars stolen from their accounts. Dad sat rigidly in his chair, staring at the forged signatures that looked nothing like his handwriting, but bore his name on check after check made out to cash. But Sarah wasn't going to go down without a fight. As soon as I paused to let the financial evidence sink in, she launched into the most elaborate and desperate performance I'd ever witnessed. Through streaming tears, she claimed that everything I was showing the family was evidence of her heroic attempts to protect Dad from the consequences of his secret gambling addiction. "I've been trying to shield everyone from the truth for months," Sarah sobbed, addressing our parents directly, while pointedly avoiding eye contact with me. "Dad came to me 6 months ago, completely broken, confessing that he'd developed a serious gambling problem and lost most of your retirement savings. He begged me not to tell Mom because he was so ashamed, and he asked for my help in covering the losses until he could get treatment." Sarah's story was elaborate and emotionally compelling. She claimed that the forged checks were actually her own money being deposited into their account to replace Dad's gambling losses. The cash withdrawals were supposedly for paying off private gambling debts that Dad owed to individuals who demanded untraceable payments. Every piece of evidence I'd presented was reframed as proof of Sarah's sacrificial love and her attempts to save our family from devastating shame and financial ruin. I've been using my own savings, my entire emergency fund, even money I borrowed against my credit cards to help replace what Dad lost. Sarah continued, her voice breaking with apparent emotion. "I didn't want anyone to know because Dad made me promise to keep his secret. I've been carrying this burden alone, trying to protect our family, while Dad worked on getting help for his addiction." Dad looked confused and started to protest, but Sarah quickly turned to him with a heartbroken expression. "I know you wanted to handle this privately, but Henrietta has forced us into this situation. I can't keep protecting you anymore when she's making it look like I'm the one who's done something wrong." The manipulation was masterful. Sarah was using Dad's natural protective instincts and Mom's fear of family scandal to create a narrative where she was the suffering hero and I was the unstable daughter destroying the family through paranoid accusations. Several family members looked uncertain, clearly struggling to reconcile the evidence I'd presented with Sarah's emotional testimony. But I'd anticipated this exact response, and I was prepared with evidence that would destroy Sarah's latest fabrication. I pulled out my laptop and showed the family screenshots from Sarah's social media accounts over the past 6 months, documenting expensive restaurants, luxury spa treatments, designer purchases, and weekend trips that would have cost thousands of dollars. If Sarah has been using her own money to help Dad, where did the funds come from for all of this? I asked, clicking through images of Sarah's lavish lifestyle. These photos show spending that would require substantial disposable income, not someone who'd emptied their savings and borrowed against credit cards to help family members. Sarah had an answer ready for this challenge, too. She claimed that all the luxury experiences had been gifts from her boyfriend Marcus, who was wealthy and enjoyed spoiling her. The expensive items were either borrowed from friends or purchased during brief periods when she'd received work bonuses before having to give the money to Dad. But this explanation fell apart when I showed the family my research into Marcus's background. I discovered that his social media profiles were fake. His supposed employer didn't exist, and none of the photos he'd posted appeared anywhere else online except as stock images. Marcus wasn't a wealthy boyfriend. He was a fictional character Sarah had created to explain her sudden access to large amounts of money. Sarah has been living in a luxury apartment that costs over $3,000 per month. I continued showing rental information I'd gathered about her building. Her documented spending over the past 6 months exceeds $30,000, far more than her salary could support and completely inconsistent with someone who's been financially helping family members. The evidence was becoming overwhelming, but Sarah made one final desperate attempt to maintain her victim narrative. She suddenly shifted tactics, claiming that I had been psychologically abusing her for months through systematic harassment threats and manipulation designed to make her question her own sanity and memory. Henrietta has been gaslighting me since she got that promotion at work, Sarah declared, her voice taking on a tone of frightened vulnerability. She's been threatening me, telling me that no one would believe anything I said because she's more successful and educated. She's been manipulating situations to make me look bad while positioning herself as the perfect daughter. Sarah produced a journal that she claimed documented months of psychological abuse, complete with detailed entries describing incidents where I'd allegedly threatened her manipulated family members against her and used my professional success to intimidate her into silence about Dad's gambling problem. She showed photos that appeared to document evidence of my supposed abuse items she claimed I'd damaged in her apartment, bruises she said I'd caused, and text messages that seemed to show threatening behavior. The journal entries were convincing and detailed, describing specific incidents with dates, times, and emotional reactions that seemed authentic. The photos showed real damage and injuries that couldn't have been faked. For a moment, even I wondered if there was some alternate version of reality where I'd somehow become the monster Sarah was describing. But then I realized what Sarah had done, and I played my final card, the secretly recorded conversations I'd found in her bedroom. I explained to the family how I'd discovered Sarah's collection of recorded private conversations, and I began playing excerpts that revealed the truth behind her manipulations. The first recording was Sarah talking to someone on the phone about her workplace embezzlement, casually discussing how she'd been stealing from client accounts and manipulating financial records to cover her tracks. Her voice was calm and calculating, completely different from the frightened victim persona she'd been performing for our family. The second recording was even more damaging. Sarah planning the barbecue deception, discussing how she would exclude me from the celebration while using our parents' stolen money to fund an elaborate party that would establish her as the successful, generous daughter. She laughed about how easily she'd convinced family members that I was arrogant and dismissive, and she expressed satisfaction about isolating me from people I loved. But the recording that destroyed Sarah's final desperate gambit was one where she discussed creating fake evidence of my supposed psychological abuse. She deliberately damaged items in her apartment and inflicted injuries on herself to create photographic evidence. She'd written the journal entries over several days, crafting a narrative of victimization that would discredit anything I might say about her actual crimes. I need everyone to think Henrietta is unstable. Sarah's recorded voice explained to whoever she was talking to, if she ever figures out what I've been doing, no one will believe her accusations because they'll think she's having a mental breakdown. The room fell completely silent as Sarah's own voice revealed the calculated cruelty behind everything she'd done. There was no more room for doubt, no more possibility of alternative explanations. Sarah had condemned herself through her own words recorded in private moments when she'd thought no one would ever discover her true motivations. Dad's face had gone from confusion to devastation as he realized the scope of Sarah's betrayal. Mom was crying quietly, not from shame about financial problems that had never existed, but from heartbreak about a daughter who'd systematically deceived and stolen from her own family. Sarah made one last desperate attempt to claim that the recordings were fabricated, that I'd somehow created fake audio to frame her. but the technical evidence was undeniable, and several family members recognized her voice discussing details that only she could have known. The truth was finally out, but the real consequences were just beginning. As the reality of Sarah's systematic deception sank in the atmosphere in the living room, shifted from confusion to horror to something approaching rage. Dad stood up abruptly, his face flushed with an anger I'd never seen before in my entire life. Mom had stopped crying and was staring at Sarah with a look of complete bewilderment, as if she was seeing a stranger wearing her daughter's face. Sarah's composure finally cracked completely, with no more lies left to tell and her own recorded voice providing undeniable evidence of her crimes. She abandoned her victim persona and revealed the cold, calculating person who'd been hiding behind emotional manipulation for months. Her tears stopped as if someone had turned off a faucet, and her voice took on a harsh, bitter tone that shocked everyone in the room. "You all want to know the truth?" Sarah spat, her mask finally falling away. "Fine, I did take money from Mom and Dad's account. I did exclude Henrietta from the barbecue. I did manipulate family relationships. But you know what? I was protecting all of you from someone who thinks she's better than this entire family." The venom in Sarah's voice was startling, but what she said next revealed the true depth of her resentment and jealousy. She launched into a tirade about how I'd always been the favored daughter, how my professional success had made me arrogant and condescending, and how the family would be better off without my negative influence. "Henrietta has been looking down on all of you for years," Sarah continued, her voice gaining volume and intensity. "She thinks she's so much smarter and more successful than everyone else. She judges your jobs, your life choices, your financial decisions. She only comes to family gatherings to feel superior about how much better her life is than yours." But Sarah's attacks on my character only served to further expose her deception. Family members who'd known me for decades could see that her accusations were completely inconsistent with my actual behavior and personality. Cousin Brett shook his head in disbelief, and Aunt Linda looked disgusted by Sarah's desperate attempt to justify her crimes through character assassination. Uncle Tom, who'd always been straightforward and direct, cut through Sarah's rant with a simple question. "If Henrietta is so terrible, why did you have to lie to keep her away from the barbecue? Why not just tell her she wasn't welcome?" The question exposed the fundamental flaw in Sarah's justification. If I'd really been as arrogant and dismissive as she claimed, there would have been no need for elaborate deceptions about financial crisis and gambling addiction. Sarah could have simply told me that my attitude was unwelcome at family gatherings, and the issue could have been addressed directly. But Sarah's manipulation had required systematic lies, because her claims about my character were completely fabricated. She'd needed to create false evidence of my supposed arrogance because no genuine evidence existed. She'd needed to intercept my communications and respond with cold, dismissive messages because my actual communications were warm and loving. Realizing that her character attacks weren't working, Sarah tried a different approach. She claimed that she was pregnant and threatened to harm herself if the family didn't support her against my false accusations. This manipulation was particularly cruel because it attempted to use the threat of violence against an unborn child to control family dynamics and avoid consequences for her crimes. But Dad, who'd remained silent during most of Sarah's desperate performance, finally spoke up with quiet authority. "You're not pregnant, Sarah. You've been lying about everything else, and you're lying about this too. I want you to leave our house right now, and I want you to stay away until you're ready to get professional help for whatever is causing you to do these things." The finality in Dad's voice seemed to break something in Sarah. She looked around the room, perhaps finally realizing that her manipulations had completely failed and that she'd lost the support of everyone who'd once loved and trusted her. For a moment, she seemed genuinely shocked that her emotional manipulations weren't working anymore. But then Sarah's expression hardened into something genuinely frightening. She stood up and began screaming about how the family would regret choosing me over her, how she'd make sure everyone paid for their betrayal, and how she had information that could destroy all of our reputations if we didn't support her version of events. The threats were vague, but clearly intended to intimidate family members into backing down from holding her accountable. Sarah suggested that she had recordings and evidence that could embarrass various family members, and she implied that she would use this information maliciously if we didn't protect her from consequences. But Sarah's threats only served to further demonstrate her lack of remorse and her continued willingness to harm family members to protect herself. Rather than expressing any regret for the pain she'd caused or the relationship she'd damaged, she was threatening to cause additional harm if she didn't get her way. Dad walked to the front door and opened it, making it clear that Sarah needed to leave immediately. "You've done enough damage to this family," he said firmly. "We're going to contact law enforcement about the theft, and we're going to tell your employer about what we've discovered. You need to leave now and figure out how to deal with the consequences of what you've done." Sarah stormed toward the door, but turned back one final time to deliver a parting shot that revealed the true core of her resentment. "You'll all regret this when you realize that Henrietta has been playing victim while planning this entire setup to get rid of me. She's been collecting evidence and manipulating all of you just like she's always manipulated everything to her advantage." Even in her final moments of defeat, Sarah was trying to position herself as the victim and me as the calculating manipulator. But the accusation fell flat, because everyone in the room had witnessed her lies, heard her recorded confessions, and seen the evidence of her systematic deception and theft. As Sarah slammed the door behind her, the room fell into exhausted silence. We'd been through an emotional marathon that had revealed the complete breakdown of trust and the destruction of relationships that had seemed unshakable just hours before. But what we didn't know was that Sarah's response to being exposed would be even more desperate and dangerous than anything she'd done before. Within hours, she would make a final catastrophic attempt to escape the consequences of her actions, and her arrest would reveal crimes that extended far beyond what we'd already discovered. The hours following Sarah's dramatic exit were filled with a mixture of emotional exhaustion and practical concerns about how to address the crimes she'd committed. Our parents were devastated not just by the financial theft, but by the realization that one of their daughters had been systematically manipulating and deceiving the entire family for months. Extended family members were struggling to process how completely they'd been fooled by someone they'd trusted without question. Dad immediately called the bank to report the forged checks and unauthorized withdrawals, beginning the process of documenting the theft for both insurance purposes and potential criminal charges. Mom worked with me to gather all the evidence we'd collected, creating a comprehensive record of Sarah's deception that could be provided to law enforcement and her employer. But around midnight, we received a phone call that changed everything. Sarah had apparently spent the evening after leaving our house making increasingly frantic calls to various family members, not to apologize or seek reconciliation, but to threaten them with exposure of embarrassing personal information if they supported criminal charges against her. Cousin Brett called to warn us that Sarah had threatened to release private family photos and personal information on social media if we didn't back off from our accusations. Aunt Linda received similar threats about professional consequences if she supported legal action. Sarah was attempting to use blackmail and intimidation to force family members to withdraw their support for holding her accountable. These threats revealed that Sarah's criminal behavior extended beyond financial theft into areas of harassment, intimidation, and potentially cybercrime. She'd apparently been collecting personal information about family members for months, possibly through the same methods she'd used to intercept my communications and secretly record private conversations. But Sarah's threatening behavior also indicated that she was becoming increasingly desperate and unpredictable. Rather than accepting responsibility for her actions or seeking help for whatever psychological issues were driving her behavior, she was escalating her attacks on family members and showing no remorse for the pain she'd already caused. Around 2 in the morning, Dad received a call from airport security at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Sarah had been detained while attempting to board a red-eye flight to Cancun, Mexico, carrying over $30,000 in cash and what appeared to be falsified identification documents. Airport security had flagged her for additional screening. Due to the large amount of cash, and a routine document check had revealed that her passport and driver's license contained fraudulent elements. When police searched Sarah's belongings more thoroughly, they discovered evidence linking her to a much larger criminal operation than anyone in our family had suspected. She was carrying multiple fake identification documents with different names, suggesting that she'd been planning to assume a new identity and disappear permanently. She also had documentation showing offshore bank accounts that contained hundreds of thousands of dollars, far more money than could be explained by her theft from our family or even her workplace embezzlement. The investigation that followed Sarah's arrest revealed the shocking scope of her criminal activities. She hadn't just been stealing from elderly clients at her workplace, she'd been running a sophisticated identity theft and financial fraud scheme that victimized dozens of people across multiple states. Sarah had been using her legitimate job as cover for accessing personal information that she then used to open credit accounts, apply for loans, and steal money from people who had no idea their identities had been compromised. The $30,000 cash she'd been carrying was just a small portion of the money she'd stolen through various schemes. Investigators discovered that Sarah had been planning her escape for months, gradually moving stolen funds to offshore accounts and preparing fake documentation that would allow her to disappear and assume a new identity in a country without extradition treaties. Sarah's arrest made local news as part of a broader investigation into white-collar crime and identity theft. The news reports described her as the central figure in a criminal network that had stolen over $500,000, from victims ranging from elderly retirees to young families trying to build credit. Many of her victims had been financially devastated by her crimes, losing life savings and having their credit destroyed. But the news coverage also revealed something that explained Sarah's specific targeting of me during her final months of criminal activity. According to the prosecutor handling her case, Sarah had viewed me as the biggest threat to her operation because of my professional background in marketing and my attention to detail. She'd recognized that I was the family member most likely to notice inconsistencies in her stories and investigate discrepancies in financial records. The elaborate campaign to exclude me from family gatherings and destroy my relationships with extended family hadn't just been about jealousy or resentment. It had been a calculated strategy to neutralize the person most capable of exposing her crimes. By positioning me as arrogant and unstable, Sarah had hoped to ensure that if I ever discovered evidence of her theft, no one would believe my accusations. The prosecutor explained that this pattern was common among white-collar criminals who targeted their own families. They often worked systematically to isolate and discredit the family members who posed the greatest threat to their schemes, using emotional manipulation and character assassination to maintain control over family dynamics while continuing their criminal activities. Learning about the full scope of Sarah's crimes helped our family understand that her betrayal of us was part of a much larger pattern of victimizing vulnerable people for financial gain. We weren't just dealing with a family member who'd made poor choices. We were dealing with someone who'd become a professional criminal, willing to destroy anyone who threatened her ability to continue stealing. The criminal charges against Sarah included multiple felonies, embezzlement, identity theft, money laundering fraud, and racketeering. With the evidence investigators had gathered, including her own recorded confessions and the financial documents found during her arrest, Sarah was facing the possibility of decades in prison. But perhaps most importantly, for our family's healing process, the criminal investigation completely vindicated everything I'd discovered and reported about Sarah's deception. The prosecutor's office confirmed that my evidence had been crucial in understanding the full scope of Sarah's crimes and identifying additional victims who needed to be notified about the theft of their personal information. For the first time in months, I felt like the truth was finally being recognized by people in positions of authority and that Sarah would face appropriate consequences for the crime she'd committed against our family and dozens of other innocent victims. 6 months after Sarah's arrest, our family was still working through the emotional aftermath of her betrayal, but we'd made remarkable progress in rebuilding trust and healing the relationships that her deception had damaged. The criminal prosecution had proceeded swiftly with Sarah ultimately pleading guilty to multiple felonies in exchange for a reduced sentence that would still keep her in prison for several years. The restitution process had been complicated but ultimately successful. Insurance covered most of the money Sarah had stolen from our parents' accounts, and the criminal court ordered full restitution for all victims of her various fraud schemes. While some victims would never fully recover their losses, the legal system had done everything possible to provide financial compensation and hold Sarah accountable for her crimes. Our extended family had rallied around my parents and me in ways that demonstrated the strength of our genuine relationships once Sarah's manipulations were removed. Cousin Brett and his girlfriend Emma had become regular visitors, often helping with household projects and spending holidays with us. Aunt Linda had taken early retirement and moved closer to Dallas to be more available for family support. Uncle Tom had become even more protective and involved, checking in regularly and helping Dad process the emotional trauma of discovering his daughter's criminal behavior. The healing process hadn't been quick or easy. Our parents had required counseling to deal with the guilt and self-doubt that came from being deceived so completely by their own daughter. They struggled with questions about whether they'd missed warning signs, whether they'd contributed to Sarah's problems through parenting mistakes, and whether they could ever trust their judgment about family relationships again. But family therapy had helped us understand that sophisticated manipulators like Sarah are skilled at exploiting the love and trust that healthy families take for granted. The very qualities that made our family strong, loyalty, forgiveness, benefit of the doubt, and emotional support, were the same qualities that Sarah had weaponized to carry out her deceptions. I'd also required professional help to process the trauma of systematic character assassination and the isolation I'd experienced when family members believed Sarah's lies about my attitude and behavior. Learning that someone I'd trusted completely had been secretly recording my private conversations and using them against me had been particularly difficult to overcome. But perhaps the most important part of our healing had been the way our family had chosen to respond to Sarah's crimes. Rather than allowing her betrayal to destroy our ability to trust each other, we'd use the experience to develop better communication skills, stronger boundaries, and more direct ways of addressing conflicts before they could be manipulated by outside influences. We'd also establish new family traditions that honored our relationships while protecting against future manipulation. Regular family meetings where concerns could be raised openly, shared access to important family financial information so no one person could control or manipulate financial records, direct communication policies that prevented anyone from serving as an intermediary who might distort messages between family members. The most meaningful change had been our annual 4th of July BBQ, which we'd held 6 months after the original cancellation with special significance for everyone involved. Jake had officially joined our family through our engagement announcement during that celebration, and Emma had become an integral part of our extended family through her relationship with Brett. But the barbecue had also served as a symbolic reclaiming of our family traditions from Sarah's attempted destruction. We decorated with photos from previous celebrations, including pictures that showed happier times when Sarah had been a genuine part of our family, rather than a predator targeting us for financial gain. During the celebration, several family members had shared reflections about what they'd learned from the experience of being deceived and manipulated. The common theme was gratitude for the strength of our relationships once the lies were removed, and renewed appreciation for the importance of direct, honest communication in maintaining family bonds. But the most surprising development had been learning about other families who'd experienced similar betrayals. The prosecutor's office had connected us with support groups for families affected by white-collar crime, and we discovered that Sarah's pattern of manipulating family relationships while committing financial crimes was unfortunately common. Meeting other families who'd survived similar experiences had been both heartbreaking and healing. We'd learned that our recovery process was normal, that the guilt and self-doubt we felt were typical responses to sophisticated manipulation, and that many families emerged from these experiences stronger and more resilient than they'd been before. I'd also discovered a sense of purpose in helping other families recognize and respond to financial abuse and manipulation. My professional background in marketing had prepared me to understand how manipulation tactics work, and my personal experience with systematic deception had given me insights that could help other families protect themselves. Working with the prosecutor's office and victim advocacy groups, I'd begun developing educational materials about family financial abuse and the warning signs that might indicate that a family member is engaging in criminal behavior. The work was emotionally challenging but deeply meaningful, allowing me to transform my painful experience into something that could protect other families from similar trauma. The most important lesson I'd learned was that sometimes the greatest betrayals lead to the most meaningful discoveries about our own strength and resilience. Sarah's crimes had initially felt like they destroyed my sense of family security and trust in relationships, but recovering from her betrayal had actually strengthened my relationships with the family members who truly cared about me and had given me a deeper appreciation for the importance of honest, direct communication. 6 months after learning about Sarah's deception, I felt more connected to my genuine family relationships than I'd ever been before. The people who'd believed Sarah's lies had learned to question manipulation and ask for direct communication. The people who doubted her claims had been validated in their trust in me. And everyone had learned valuable lessons about protecting our relationships from people who would exploit them for personal gain. Sarah's final sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month, and our family would be there to provide victim impact statements that described the full extent of the emotional and financial damage her crimes had caused. But we would also be there as a united family that had survived her attempts to destroy us, ready to move forward with stronger relationships and clearer boundaries than we'd ever maintained before. 1 year after that devastating 4th of July, when I discovered Sarah's betrayal through her live stream, our family gathered once again in my parents' backyard for our annual barbecue celebration. But this year was different in ways that filled my heart with gratitude and hope, rather than the anxiety and confusion that had characterized the previous year's events. The backyard looked beautiful, decorated with the same red, white, and blue traditions we'd maintained for 16 years, but enhanced by new additions that reflected our family's growth and resilience. Jake and I had announced our engagement 3 months earlier, and wedding planning had become a joyful family project that brought everyone together in positive ways. Emma had become such an integral part of our extended family that it was hard to remember a time when she hadn't been part of our celebrations. The guest list included all the family members who'd been manipulated by Sarah's lies the previous year, but also new friends we'd made through our involvement with victim advocacy groups and support organizations. Our experience surviving financial abuse had connected us with other families who'd faced similar challenges, creating new relationships based on mutual understanding and shared growth. Most importantly, our family had developed new traditions and communication practices that honored our relationships while protecting against future manipulation. We'd established annual financial reviews where important family information was shared openly, preventing any one person from controlling or distorting financial realities. We'd implemented direct communication policies that required family members to speak directly with each other, rather than relying on intermediaries who might have their own agendas. Dad had fully recovered from the emotional trauma of discovering Sarah's crimes, though he'd learned valuable lessons about the importance of verifying information independently rather than accepting claims without evidence. Mom had channeled her experience into volunteer work with elderly victims of financial abuse, using her teaching skills to help vulnerable populations recognize and respond to manipulation tactics. The legal proceedings against Sarah had concluded 6 months earlier with her sentencing to 5 years in federal prison, followed by supervised probation and restitution requirements that would continue for years beyond her release. The judge had described her crimes as particularly cruel because they targeted family members and elderly victims who trusted her completely. But perhaps most meaningful for our family's healing process, the prosecutor had revealed during Sarah's sentencing hearing that my investigation and evidence gathering had been crucial, not just in exposing her crimes against our family, but in identifying dozens of additional victims and recovering hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen funds. My determination to uncover the truth had helped protect other families from ongoing victimization. The experience had also led to an unexpected career development. Working with victim advocacy groups and law enforcement agencies had introduced me to the growing field of financial abuse, prevention, and education. I'd been offered a position with a nonprofit organization that develops educational programs to help families recognize and respond to financial manipulation and abuse. The new job combined my marketing background with my personal experience surviving systematic deception, allowing me to create materials and programs that could help other families protect themselves from predators who exploit family relationships for financial gain. The work was emotionally challenging but deeply meaningful, transforming my painful experience into something that could benefit others. But the most important lesson I'd learned wasn't about recognizing criminal behavior or protecting against financial abuse. It was about the incredible resilience of genuine family relationships when they're based on love, honesty, and mutual respect rather than manipulation and control. Sarah's betrayal had initially felt like it destroyed my sense of family security and trust in relationships, but surviving her manipulation had actually strengthened my connections with family members who truly cared about me. The people who'd briefly believed her lies had learned to value direct communication and question manipulation. The people who'd never doubted my character had been validated in their trust. Everyone had learned that healthy families can survive even the most sophisticated attempts at manipulation and destruction as long as they're committed to truth communication and supporting each other through difficult times. We discovered that recovery from betrayal requires patience, professional help, and willingness to examine our own vulnerabilities, but that families can emerge from these experiences stronger and more resilient than they were before. As the sun set over our backyard celebration, I looked around at the faces of people who'd supported me through the most difficult year of my adult life. Jake, who'd never wavered in his belief in my character, even when family members were questioning my behavior. My parents, who'd chosen truth over comfort when faced with evidence of their daughter's crimes. Extended family members who'd been brave enough to acknowledge they'd been deceived and work to repair relationships. The fireworks that night meant stolen money funding a celebration designed to exclude and hurt family members. They were a genuine expression of joy and gratitude for relationships that had survived systematic attempts at destruction. They represented new beginnings, renewed trust, and the promise of family traditions that would continue for generations to come. I'd learned that sometimes the people who try to destroy us actually reveal the strength we never knew we possessed. Sarah's betrayal had forced me to develop investigative skills, emotional resilience, and advocacy abilities that I'm now using to help other families protect themselves. Her attempt to isolate me from people I loved had actually strengthened those relationships and taught us all better ways to communicate and support each other. Most importantly, I'd learned that family isn't about blood relationships or shared genetics. It's about people who choose to love, support, and protect each other through everything life brings. It's about people who celebrate your successes without resentment, support you through challenges without judgment, and stand by you when others try to tear you down. Sarah had chosen to see our family relationships as opportunities for exploitation and manipulation, but the rest of us had chosen to see them as foundations for love growth and mutual support that could survive even the most determined attempts at destruction. The barbecue ended with everyone sharing reflections about the year we'd survived and hopes for the future we were building together. There wasn't a single person present who wasn't grateful for the lessons we'd learned, the growth we'd experienced, and the stronger relationships we'd developed through surviving Sarah's betrayal. As Jake and I cleaned up after the celebration, he asked me if I ever regretted the pain we'd all been through or wished that Sarah's crimes had never been discovered. I thought about it carefully before answering. I regret that Sarah made the choices she made, and I regret the pain she caused to innocent victims who didn't deserve to be targeted, I said. But I don't regret learning the truth or going through the process of fighting for my family relationships. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones that force us to discover how strong we really are. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone you trusted completely turned out to be manipulating you behind your scenes? How did you find the strength to fight back and reclaim your relationships? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And I hope sharing my experience helps others recognize that families can survive even the most devastating betrayals when they're committed to truth and genuine love. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help other people find it who might need to hear this message. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and building stronger relationships through difficult times. And please share this with anyone who might be dealing with family manipulation or financial abuse. Sometimes people need to know they're not alone and that recovery is possible. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it brings you hope that even the darkest family situations can lead to stronger relationships and deeper appreciation for the people who truly love and support us. Family is worth fighting for, and truth always has the power to overcome even the most sophisticated lies.